Now we'll be joined by best-selling author, organizational psychologist, and Wharton's top-rated professor, Adam Grant. His new book, Think Again, is about learning to question your opinions and open other people's minds, which can position you for excellence at work and wisdom in life. As he mentioned in an opinion piece in last month's New York Times, he's, quote, run experiments that led proponents of gun rights and gun safety to abandon some of their mutual animosity, and was even able to get Yankees fans to let go of their grudges against Red Sox supporters. As the daughter of a diehard Red Sox fan father and a dyed-in-the-wool Yankees fan mother, I can say the one area my parents disagree on is whose team is superior. So I am personally very invested and interested in this conversation. Adam will be joined by M13 partner Christine Choi. Hello to both of you, and thank you.
Yay, Adam, I'm so happy to see you. Thank you. I'm so grateful for your time. Over the years, obviously, we've been friends, and not surprisingly, it turns out that our founders, our teams, and our investors in the M13 community have long admired you and your insights. Your new book, Think Again, became an instant bestseller. But to me, the telling metric is that everybody is talking about it. So congratulations.
Thank you. You would know better than I would. So I'm thrilled to hear that.
Your superpower is truly your ability to use culture to open people's minds, right? To consider new ways of looking at things that we've always thought about in the same way. So let's start talking a little bit about startup culture. Obviously, this is something that our founders and our investors are living in. And startup culture can be defined by a combination of executional speed and innovation. And sometimes that happens at the sacrifice of hearing perspectives and voices, resulting in people staying silent in what you call the anxiety zone in the book. Is there room for psychological safety in a startup culture? I want to start up by asking you that question. And if you believe there is, how do we create a culture that values both speed and psychological safety?
Interesting. Well, I think is there room is a fun way to frame it, because I think if you care about preventing catastrophic errors or promoting breakthrough innovation, you have to have psychological safety. We have the evidence is consistent and strong over the years that when teams lack psychological safety, people hide their mistakes. They're more likely to repeat them, and no one else can learn from them. When people have it, they actually admit their errors. Other people can try to figure out how to prevent them. We also know that if you lack psychological safety, people will not raise problems or solutions. If you have it, people are more likely to bring their bold ideas to the table. And I think that there's nothing about psychological safety that stands in the way of speed, right? Psychological safety is just the freedom to take a risk without having to fear that you're going to get punished. That means I can point out something that's broken, whether it's a technical bug or a management bug. It means I can admit when I don't know something, and it means I can ask for help. And I want to see both of those things happen in a startup, don't you? I want to see psychological safety, and I want to see speed. I think that one of the most dangerous things that I watch founders do in startups is they say, don't bring me blank, bring me blank. Christine, you probably had a boss at some point in your career who liked to say that. Can you fill in the blanks for me? Don't bring me blank, bring me blank.
That's very funny that you say that. I think about the space companies and how our test flight engineers and the aerospace engineers didn't necessarily see all setbacks as failures, but as learning opportunities. And I think that's obviously what you're trying to get at in terms of enabling that psychological safety for all those voices, the naysayers, to say, I'm nervous about this, or I have a question about that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the mistake that too many leaders and managers make, and I see this with founders more often than not, is they say, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, right? I don't want you to whine and complain, but this is a dangerous philosophy, because if people can only speak up when they have a solution, you will never hear about your biggest problems, which are too complex for any one person to solve. The foundation of psychological safety is making it easy for people to raise problems, even if they don't know how to fix them. And that way, the canaries in the coal mine who are good at detecting issues, but may not have the authority, the resources, or the motivation to do anything about them, will still speak up and get heard, and then you can tackle some of your biggest problems. To me, that's indispensable for a startup.
That actually gets to the kind of good grit and bad grit that you speak about in the book also. I really love that you gave language to that, because we typically admire leaders with unbending conviction. And the startup world, values grit. Tell us about when good grit goes wrong and how a strength like that can turn into a weakness.
Yeah, the trap we worry about is called escalation of commitment to a losing course of action. It was coined by Barry Stott Berkeley, and we've all seen it, right? You make an initial investment, you get some negative feedback, or you find out that maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but you don't want to admit to yourself and everyone else that you made a bad decision or that you're a bad decision maker. You're also worried that you're going to regret pulling the plug too soon. You want to finish what you started. And so you double down and you invest even more. And this is why so many founders refuse to let go of employees who are toxic to their cultures. It's why too many founders also fail to pivot when they find out that their minimum viable product launch was not successful. They're like, well, no, I have to prove that this was a good idea all along. And I think that it's not to say that grit is not a virtue, right? It's just saying, let's be gritty about the right things. You don't want to be completely attached to your plans or your strategy. You want to be attached to a set of values and maybe a mission, and be very flexible about the best ways to achieve that. And Christine, as you know, one of my favorite studies that I covered in Think Again is of Italian founders of startups. They're all pre-revenue. They're randomly assigned during this entrepreneurship course for 3-4 months to think like scientists. And they all get the same education. They all get the same training in how to run startups. What they don't know is the scientist group has just been told, look, your strategy is just a theory. Go do customer interviews to develop specific hypotheses, and then treat your first product or service launch as a test of those hypotheses to see if you're right or wrong. And that scientific thinking group, just that frame, is enough to boost the average founder's revenue by more than 40 times over the control group over that next year. And the major reason why is those founders are more than twice as likely to pivot. Instead of falling in that escalation of commitment trap, they say, you know what, my strategy, my theory was wrong, or I had the wrong market for testing my hypotheses, or I need to rethink my product or my service. And then they were much more comfortable changing their minds.
On the topic of rethinking, your influence on cultural norms reminds me actually of another author who I deeply admire, Michael Pollan, whose last book was called How to Change Your Mind. It's helped so many people unpack the political systems that have undermined psychedelics and also how they might be applied in health and well-being. I would love to hear from you. Is there one thing in the last year, in this last turbulent year, that you have changed your own mind about?
I've changed my mind on so many things. Where do you want to start?
I love that you give us permission to change our minds. It's fantastic. Keep going.
I mean, one of the places I've changed my mind is something that I think that I was sort of right about, but I was also wrong about, which is in the winter of 2018, I went to a bunch of the most powerful founders and CEOs in Silicon Valley. And I said, I'd love to do a remote Friday experiment. We'll let people 1 day a week work from anywhere. We'll test the impact on productivity and creativity. And here's some evidence from C-Trip in China that this can be effective. We have a meta-analysis showing that as long as people are in the office 2.5 days a week, you can get performance and satisfaction boosts without any cost to relationships or collaboration. And all the founders turned me down. All the CEOs said, no, thank you. And hilariously, at least 3 of those CEOs have now announced that they might be permanently remote workforces. And I think I've rethought a few things there. The first one is I was overly optimistic about how comfortable people would be with remote work. I really underestimated the isolation, the loneliness, the lack of community and structure. And I was much more focused just on, okay, can you perform? Do you enjoy having the freedom and flexibility to work from anywhere, whenever you want, as opposed to being forced to do it from home? The second thing that I've rethought as part of that is the way that I go about persuading founders and CEOs to change their minds, right? I came in kind of in preacher and prosecutor mode saying, look, here's the evidence that I'm right and you're wrong. And now I'm much more likely to go into scientist mode. And when they object to my data, say, why? This is just so fascinating. Like, Christine, why did you call me for advice if you don't value my evidence? Could you help me understand that a little bit better? And then tell me what would change your mind. And then I'm trying to learn how to open their minds as opposed to forcing them to do it.
By the way, in the chat, we've added the Adam's quiz. We're talking about preachers and politicians and scientists and litigators, and there's a reason for that. So take the quiz and obviously read the book, Think Again, which gets into the ways of thinking. Adam, I'm so happy that you mentioned the study that you just described from pre-pandemic. we are all, like, our community of founders, they're all changing the world in some way. They're building things that are truly improving people's lives, but they're doing it alone, in a room, in a closet, in a corner of an apartment, in their parents' homes, in a time when we're all yearning to feel productive and also connected. It's our hope at M13 that the work that we do to support our founders build great companies, it's our hope that these conversations are going to help soothe some of that burden, some of that psychological, physical, and emotional burden and isolation. And what obviously books like yours, conversations like what we're doing right now, are helping us give data and permission to be less transactional and humane. Have you seen examples of how other leaders are addressing burnout and giving us permission to maybe slow down in a time? Again, I keep coming back to speed, but I also feel I get a little hyperventilated when I think about the speed with which we have to do things and accelerate outcomes. Any suggestions for you on addressing burnout?
Yeah. So I did an episode of my TED podcast, Work Life, last year on burnout. And if you look at the ways to curb burnout, there are basically three categories of changes you can make. One is to reduce the demands of the job. Two is to give people more control over whatever demands they do face. And then three is to provide them with more support. And I don't think there's that much we can do about the demands right now. I think people are already getting a lot of control and flexibility in certain ways, at least for those of us who are remote. I think what's most missing is the support factor. And that's cultural. It's also structural. A couple of things that I would suggest trying for anybody who's trying to build that support. One is, it turns out there's good evidence that it's helpful just to share embarrassing stories every once in a while. It obviously humanizes people. It also allows them to understand each other a little bit better and trust each other. There's also evidence that if people share embarrassing stories, they become more creative afterward, and they end up sharing more ideas because you think, well, I must trust you. Otherwise, why in the world did I tell you this? So I think there's something there. I think that obviously if you're a founder or a leader, it's helpful to do what Julie Lythcott-Haims calls normalizing struggle. To say, look, I don't expect you to be perfect. I expect you to be human. And let me tell you about some of the challenges that I've been facing over the past few months, in the hopes that we can all figure out how to do a better job accommodating and understanding each other's obstacles.
I am told that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to choose one last question. I love what you just said. By the way, Richard says hello. I want to go back to one of my favorite business books, Give and Take. In a cutthroat culture, you helped us reconsider the values of givers over takers. It turns out that givers add more value to organizations than selfish takers or quid pro quo matchers. You gave us, again, permission to be human. I'm afraid to ask, but in the spirit of conversation, is there anything in the book that you have since rethought or reconsidered?
Of course. Yeah. I didn't talk nearly enough about how to build a culture of productive generosity, right? I was mostly focused on individually, how do you balance your desire to help others with your ambitions for your own success? And I think when it comes to organizations, the things that I would put on the map now that have good evidence behind them are: one, screen out takers in your hiring process. The negative impact of a taker on a culture is often double to triple the positive impact of a giver. One bad apple can spoil a barrel, but one good egg just does not make a dozen. And you want a mix of givers and matchers, but I think getting rid of the most selfish people is pretty important. Two, you want a recognition and reward system that actually values people's contributions to the collective, not just their individual achievements, right? Too many organizations say we want collaboration, we want people to help each other solve problems, but then they only measure and incentivize individual results, which is a disincentive for people to support each other. And then the third thing is back to the point about normalizing struggle: make it easy for people to ask for help. The data show that 75 to 90% of all giving and helping in organizations starts with a request. So a lot of people will step up if they only knew who could benefit from their help and how, but too many of us don't ask. We don't want to be vulnerable. We like to be self-reliant. If you're a giver, you don't want to burden others. And just remember, if you never ask anyone for help, you are frustrating a lot of the givers in your organization who would be thrilled to pitch in.
Adam, I'm mindful of the time that I've already taken. I'm so grateful of all the time you've given me in the past. Thank you so much for this conversation. I know that everyone at M13 appreciates your wisdom and your pragmatic optimism. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you soon.